Hello, today is March the 5th. It is Friday, of course, and we are continuing our discussion of imperialism, but today it's different. Today we're going to talk about American imperialism. And actually, to be honest, when Europe was imperial, was basically colonizing, exploiting Africa, Asia, the United States didn't really participate. In fact, to be honest, the United States actually helped the Chinese, tried to help the Chinese develop a modern nation. Was After the United States basically bombarded Japan in 1853, they tried to be the Japanese friend so they could make money, to be honest. But the one place in the world, and this, is worth knowing, that the United States has shown its ugly head of imperialism has been Latin America. You say, now, what is Latin America? Latin America basically is most of the countries south of the Rio Grande River, the river that borders Texas and Mexico. That's Latin America. Why do they call it Latin America? Because they speak derivatives of the Latin language, except for one. There's one country and this is just trivia, one country in what we now call Latin America that speaks English, and that is a small country called Belize. Will you excuse me for a moment? I need to get me a caffeine. And we are back. Yes. So getting back to the matter at hand. So yeah, the United States has been a terrible neighbor, and you don't read about this in a lot of history books. I mean, for example, the United States militarily invaded Nicaragua, a small Central American country, three times in the 20th century. The western third of the United States, talking about from California, Texas, even all the states in between, were basically, what happened was the United States goaded Mexico into a fight, beat them up because they were a weaker neighbor, and then took that western third of the country. And I mean, to show you how valuable it is, California alone, if it were an independent country, California would have the sixth largest economy on planet Earth. And there's no way you get around it. If the United States was tried in an international court, they would say you stole that from Mexico. Did? Oh yeah, okay. So we turned around and paid Mexico $15 million to make ourselves feel better. But yeah, it was imperialism, unmasked, unbridled imperialism. The United States picked on a weaker neighbor. So let's get into it, shall we? And I love this country. I think this is the greatest country on earth. But I think that as an historian, you have to try to be accurate. And so let's get to it, shall we? So here's a tech question. The one part of the world where the United States was most imperialistic was Latin America. Once again, south of the Texas border. Latin America during the 19th century was an imperialist dream world. I mean, Latin America was and is rich in resources. Not necessarily the same resources as you find in the United States, but resources. We say, like what? Well, of course, there is petroleum on the northern coast of South America. There is agricultural products like coffee, bananas, sugarcane. Then you get into things like, for example, the world's largest supply of lithium. Lithium is found in Bolivia. Now, does anybody know what lithium is? He said, well, every one of you and I right now have some lithium on us. What is it? It's the primary substance in the battery that powers your cell phones. Yeah, lithium. And Bolivia in South America has over 50% of the world's supply of lithium. And yet Bolivia is a very poor country. I mean, products like that, agricultural products, they have lots of beef. Fact of the matter is, when you go to McDonald's and get a McDonald's hamburger, there's a good chance you're not eating an American cow, you're eating Argentinian beef imported from Argentina. And yet, those countries are incredibly poor and are incredibly unstable. So, yes, Latin American countries, politically unstable. Plata or plomo? Now, I don't know how many of you guys take Spanish. I'm actually taking it. I'm teaching myself Spanish through Duolingo. My wife is Colombian, and I intend to visit South America before too much longer, and I want to be able to understand what people say. Plato o plomo is a expression. Plato, in this case, means silver. Plomo means lead. Silver or lead. But what does that mean? Well, it's a saying that was popular in Colombia in the latter part of the 20th century, whereby, and not just Colombia, Mexico, for example, whereby you'd have a government official and criminal elements, particularly from the drug trade, would approach this official and make him the offer, plata or plomo, silver or lead, meaning that we will give you money, but you work for us. If you refuse the money and work for us, we'll give you lead. And I'm sure you know what that means. For example, in the 1970s and 80s, 400, count them, 400 federal judges in Colombia were assassinated. Many of them by a guy named Pablo Escobar in the cocaine trade. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting story. I mean, and many of the governments are unstable. For example, Mexico is working on its sixth government in less than 200 years. Oh, yes, the word Yankee or gringo, you're looking at one. Yankees are a slang term Latin Americans have for people from the United States. It's not flattering. And gringo is even less flattering. It means stranger. Yeah, the relations between, so you have all these countries in Latin America that are rich in natural resources, and they're politically unstable. And so it's difficult then to establish a high standard of living in those countries. I intend to go visit Colombia, where my wife lives, but do I know what I'm going to be seeing? No, but I've got a pretty good idea. And it is a country where, little things that we take for granted, like driving up and down US 42 or any streets, and the streets being relatively clean. For example, when my wife first came here, she was very shocked to know that we regularly go out at night. And where she lives, going out at night is not safe. I mean, you get in your home before the sun goes down and lock the doors. And I've seen pictures of the interior of her apartment. She lives on a ground floor apartment. Bars on all the windows, double locks on the doors, metal doors. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, to most of the people of Latin America, a political independence from Spain didn't really change that much of their lives. Remember that, except for Brazil, all of Central and South America was once a Spanish colony. They, meaning most South Americans, still worked for large landowners and were paid vouchers, script, specie, currency that was not any good anywhere except in the company store. They found themselves, it says there, another day older, deeper in debt. Yes. That was true for many of the working poor who toiled on these plantations that were designed to make money for the few. Political instability was another problem. Many of the governments changed hands several times. Caudillos were corrupt political figures in South America. Juan Vincent Gomez, who ruled Venezuela for 30 years after coming to power in 1908, said, "All of Venezuela is my cattle ranch," and he meant it. In contrast, Domingo Sarmiento was a political leader who was virtuous. He didn't last long. The legacy of the Caudillos, the corrupt political individuals, was that the people of Latin America gained little knowledge or appreciation for democracy, which, to be honest, is still a problem that plagues that part of the world today. I mean, for example, in Venezuela, in the last election, the candidate that won a large majority of the popular vote was kept from taking office by the strongman, the political strongman who has control of the army, who's ruling now. And Venezuela is probably not alone in that regard. During the year, it was about 2 years ago in Venezuela, the average person in Venezuela lost 15 pounds. Right? Wrap your head around that. The average person in Venezuela lost 15 pounds. And that was not a diet thing. It was not a choice thing. You know, a lot of people blame that on socialism. It's probably more a problem of corruption, governmental inefficiency. But yeah. So, Roman numeral 20. When colonial rule ended in LA stands for not Los Angeles, but Latin America. Latin America, once again, those countries south of the Rio Grande, like Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, Argentina, Chile, Peru. When colonial rule ended in Latin America, the newly independent states began trading mainly with Britain and the United States. Latin American economies still continued to depend upon their exports. And normally they depended upon one or two major products exports. That was a deal that helped the Americans and Europeans more than the Latins, because the Latins traded raw materials like coffee, cattle, gold and silver, copper. They traded raw materials and in return bought manufactured goods at very high prices. And as it says there, they had an unfavorable balance of trade with the British and the Americans. Just about every railroad in South America, by the way, in Argentina for sure, was built by the British. And yeah, it was not a good situation. Built, owned, and profited by the British. The Latin American states also often found themselves in debt to the Americans and the Europeans, and they did not do a good job of investing their income from exports. Often these countries could not repay the loans, and foreign powers would attempt to come in and take the loans by force. Other times, the new governments would nationalize. That means the new government would take over companies, foreign-owned investments like sugar, and that would invite more foreign intervention. Ah, yes, the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine was founded by James Monroe in the year 1820. And it said three things. Number one, that the Western Hemisphere is closed to further colonization by European powers. Two, that the United States would respect all currently existing and three, that the U.S. would stay out of purely European affairs. That's the Monroe Doctrine. It was made so that European countries would not come and try to reestablish colonies after Spain had been kicked out. I mean, because there was a real threat of that happening. Several countries in Europe, Austria, Russia, Prussia, were thinking about coming over after the Spanish had been kicked out, reestablishing those colonies. The U.S. said no. Now, here's the question. Since it was offered by the United States in 1820 was a weakling. Why did no European country try to violate it? Well, to be real honest, they weren't afraid of the United States. What they were afraid of was Great Britain, the British Navy. Yeah, the British Navy backed the Monroe Doctrine. Why? Because when the Spanish got kicked out of Central and South America, the British, who always had a mind towards making money, the British began trading in Latin America, which they could not do before, and were making money hand over fist trading in Latin America. Like I said, they owned cattle ranches in Argentina, banana plantations in Brazil, um, coffee plantations in Colombia. They invested heavily. But that's why those nations didn't, and the British backed it. So, why was this document hated by Latin American countries, an act of imperialism? Well, and you say, well, but look, the U.S. is protecting South America. Yeah, that's true. I guess you could say that. That's one way of looking at it, but it's not really. The United States did that. The Monroe Doctrine is what you call a unilateral statement, a statement made solely in the interest of one party. And in the case of the Monroe Doctrine, that party is the United States of America. The United States didn't make the Monroe Doctrine for the benefit of Mexico or Colombia or any of those countries. No, they made it for their own benefit. So, and there's one thing missing in the Monroe Doctrine. Nowhere in the Monroe Doctrine does it say that the United States would not mess around with Central and South America. And by mess around, I mean basically come in there and bully the place, which they did. Remember, once again, the western third of this country was stolen from Mexico. And, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They don't put it in American history books because it makes the U.S. look like an imperialist monster, which they weren't. So, as it says there, one of the great acts of American imperialism was probably the Spanish-American War. It once again began in a dispute over Cuba. Why was America interested in Cuba? Answer, sugar. Jose Marti was a Cuban national who was trying to get independence. Cuba its independence from Spain. And we've already talked about the Maine. That was the U.S. battleship that got blown up in Havana Harbor, which was the incident that, gave the excuse, the spark for the Spanish-American War. Who was Teddy Roosevelt? Teddy Roosevelt became president of the United States. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, that's one of those myths, actually. Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt led a battalion up San Juan Hill, but actually the real fighting on San Juan Hill was conducted and won by a group of American colored infantry, African Americans. The army was segregated back then, but Teddy Roosevelt got the press for it, which helped him win the presidency. Where were Americans trained for this war? Among other places, a little town called Fort Thomas, Kentucky. Yeah, Fort Thomas. And why do you think it's called a fort? That's where they were trained. American soldiers were trained. Fort Thomas was established after the American Civil War. It was used as a military base. Actually, the old military base was in Newport. But Newport, as a town, had a lot of distractions for soldiers. You know what I'm saying? Distractions. Houses prostitution, basically. And so what the American government did, they moved the American training facility up on top of that hill, which is Fort Thomas. And that way, it was harder for those soldiers to always be visiting those people. And so, yeah, Fort Thomas trained American soldiers for, wait for it, Spanish-American War, World War One, and World War II. After that, it's now kind of a National Guard reserve base. The biggest killer of American soldiers in the Spanish-American War was not the Spanish. The number one killer of American soldiers, mosquitoes. Mosquitoes. Yellow fever. Second biggest killer, botulism. You say, what's that? Eating bad food. The United States government bought a lot of canned meat that was bad, and the soldiers ate it, and they died. And third biggest killer, okay, eventually, Spanish soldiers, but not that many. How were American soldiers equipped? I mean, it's kind of interesting. The American Army shows up in Mobile, Alabama to disembark for Cuba, and they're wearing standard issue woolen, did I say woolen uniforms to go fight in Cuba. I don't know how much you know about Cuba. It's not a cold place, yeah. And then the food, of course, like I said, second leading cause of death was botulism, botulism. The war between Spain and the United States was never, I mean, it was over in 6 months. And after the United States beat Spain, like they stole in 6 months, and a war that was fought both in Cuba but also in the Philippines, the United States had Cuba, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. It became a world international imperialist country. Cuba resented their American masters just as much as the Spanish, and this fueled resentments that burn today still between these two countries. And we're going to talk about the Panama Canal and probably finish this chapter maybe Monday. Okay? So thanks.